My name's Lance Younger. I'm ProcureTech. We work in the same space as used to work in, analysing different solutions and different platforms and working with corporates to help map the landscape. We also work with digital solutions as well to help them scale, that match and scale. I'm lucky enough today to have about half an hour of time, check in there, to ask a couple of key questions about how you get about and go about starting on this journey, then how you go about selecting solutions, and then what it all means for the supplier experience. We've heard from 2 or 3 people today how important that supplier experience is, and we echo that as well. So maybe we get started, Marc, straight away. I mean, maybe do a quick intro, and then it'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey so far at J&J, and especially with regards to supplier experience.
Sure. So, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. So Marc Bengio, I am head of technology for procurement at Johnson & Johnson. And we support, procurement end-to-end, both on direct and indirect procurement. And I'll make a statement for Louise and for Duncan. I am in IT, and it doesn't take 4 days for the workflow. It takes 4.5 days. But,
that's why we put Jacy in the middle.
I'm a mediator.
I try to think that our team is a little bit different, and we focus on really what our business partners need, and our strategy is anchored on supplier experience. In the last couple of years, J&J had made a strong effort to really put the supplier at the center, at the same level as our customers, and at the same level as our employees. If you take a look at our credo, and this year is our 80th anniversary. It was written in 1943. It hasn't changed much. And in the first paragraph, it's all about our patients, our customers, nurses, mothers and fathers. And at the end of the paragraph, it talks about our suppliers, that they should make a fair value in our exchanges with our suppliers. So anchoring on that, that's where we're developing our strategy. That's where we're going from, our processes, and of course, the technology to support it.
And I had a quick question, and there's a lot going on there. So how do you prioritize? What's the thought pattern you go through? And then how do you prioritize when you've probably got an ecosystem of solutions as well?
We have a lot of solutions, with a lot of ERPs, and certainly procurement. We're not putting our stuff in on the ERP. So really looking at what is the best solutions out there, and how we can create an ecosystem, first of all, anchored on certain principles. The first one, as I mentioned already, is really driving that supplier experience. And really, the second one is enabling capabilities through technology, supporting those processes. And the third one is really how do we bring our digital quotient higher at our employee level? Make sure what are things that they can be doing on their own. How can they, with our evolving of data sciences, AI, generative AI, what are the elements that we can start bringing from that perspective? Now, in terms of prioritization, one thing that we started about a year ago, again, initiated by our business, is a procurement garage. And the idea of a garage, you bring a car, you don't want the car to be in there for long. And it's a way to really hone in on those leading edge capabilities that procurement business needs and drive the technology, the digital element that can really help and drive that. It's a 100 days type of proof of concept. Once we're done, can we scale up or move on to something different? And really that helps us prioritize. But again, at the end of the day, it's part of our strategy and the roadmaps that we bring from leading edge capabilities on what we want to turn on or turn off as part of our process.
Interesting. And Duncan, you talked a bit about prioritization, selection, but and in an ideal world with a blank sheet of paper, there's a model there, which is great. But when you're sitting with an existing landscape, what are the sorts of things that you would kind of encourage people to consider as they're prioritizing?
Well, I think traditionally we've always been guided to look for the low-hanging fruit, but I think that's a mistake, actually. I think we have to be looking for fruit that's a little bit higher up, because we want to do something which is achievable, but will be impressive if it works.
Yeah.
And saving a few bucks on office supplies isn't going to win us more investment in future. So I think we have to look at something which is really a little bit tough, so that when we get it to work, people are going to sit up and take notice. I think the other thing is we've got to be able to prove the benefits. It's got to be measurable results. So if we have something that saves time for the people in our department, we can show how many hours of time they used to spend doing this task and how many hours we freed up that they can presumably allocate to more important tasks. I mean, if we're building nuclear power stations and we feel that we don't have enough resources to do proper supplier management on more than 20 suppliers, we've got a big problem. So we need to free up more time by getting rid of a lot of those time-consuming tasks, so that actually we can do a proper job, as an example. Whereas we might be quite interested in this magic technology that claims it will negotiate better with suppliers via email by suggesting phrases we can use, but we'll never know whether it worked or not. We'll never know from the result whether it was actually better than the human could have done or not. And so nobody will be impressed by that because they've only got our word for it that it actually worked. So I would say focus on time saving, because you can prove that you freed up time, and then we can take it as read that your procurement colleagues will have used that time productively to do something that's valuable to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's where the rubber hits the road, Jacy. Maybe we want to do a quick introduction, and then I've got a great question for you.
Yep. So I'm Jacy Basset with HICX. I run the professional services. I've been with HICX for 5 years, and before that I was a customer for 10 years. So as a practitioner, having sat on your side of the fence, as well as the technologist, a lot of insights in how to integrate these technologies, supplier adoption, supplier engagement, walk through quite a bit of those journeys.
And kind of, it's another spin on the prioritization question, but what's the toughest scenario you've been in when a client has said, well, this is the strategy we'd like to execute on, these are our priorities, but you can see that they're not quite the right set of priorities? What would you do in that scenario?
So at HICX, our services team, having been a practitioner, we spend a lot of time on education. So educating the different data models, walking through change management with the teams, and the impact that it's going to have on them. You don't want to wildly disrupt the business when you're implementing these technologies. You want to enable them, not disrupt them.
Yeah, cool. So we've kind of got and created a portfolio of solutions we want to go and select. That then comes maybe some of the magic. I was fascinated to hear a little bit about, maybe, Duncan, some of your experiences. Yes, we know you can go to the market with a very formal RFP and RFQ, but where does kind of intuition and experience sit in this? Where does kind of seeing some of the leading or lagging indicators that mean you can kind of, not shortcut the process, but get the best outcome?
So, yeah, certainly when we were evaluating vendors, we didn't ask them to assert that they had every capability that we could possibly want. We sort of looked for a few indicators that we could trust that if they could do these things, they could probably do the others. And so it's like if I wanted to know whether you could play the piano or not, I wouldn't have to sort of watch you playing a piano concerto. I could just ask you a couple of questions, which would tell me if you knew what you were talking about or not. And so that's what we're looking for, is those key questions. And a couple of examples might be, of course, AI, particularly generative AI, is going to be very important over the next few years. So I would ask them some questions about what are they doing with it, how long have they been working with it, do they have real use cases in use by real customers, and the ones that sort of evade the question and say, well, it's in our labs and we've got some great ideas that's coming down the pipe, are maybe not as impressive as the ones who say, well, here's an example of how we've been using that and we've been working with it, for a number of years. And I think maybe another idea would be the agility. Something new happens, whatever is current at the time. Yeah. I mentioned, the German supply chain law. Maybe there's something else that's just come out about a new reporting requirement, and say, okay, how does your solution handle this new requirement which has just landed on my desk? And if they say, oh yeah, we know all about that, we're working on it, it'll be out in 3 months' time, that's good. And if they say, oh, well, I don't know tell me about that. I'm not up to speed on that. You know, that's bad. I mean, and that's particularly where you've got these sort of, you know, the do-it-yourself ServiceNow type solutions. They're going to give you that equivocating answer, whereas the real specialists are already on top of it and are working on the solution before you even know you're going to need it.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I mean, we analyze over 4,000 solutions every year as part of the ProcureTech 100, and we look at 40 different data sets, from patent submissions to the size of their engineering team to lawsuits, trying to pick out those indicators that maybe don't get declared when there's somebody responding to an RFP or an RFQ as well.
Right.
Yeah. And then maybe, Marc, from you, I mean, how do you make sure that you get the business engaged? I mean, you're kind of in a little bit of a bridging role between IT and procurement, but how do we make sure you ultimately get the users engaged as you go through this selection process?
I think one of the things that we do is show them what's the art of the possible. And with that, look at what are their pain points, what are the things that they're doing. An example is the latest project we're working on, which is really looking for our medtech organization, but the way we're solutioning, we're envisioning the whole company. But let's start with our medtech organization, where they have what we call about 42 or 43 jobs to be done. And that is all interactions with our suppliers. We have quite a number of portals, let it be for paying invoices, let it be for looking at CAPAs from a quality perspective, so for plan, source, deliver, all kinds of different portals that, first of all, the supplier needs to identify themselves and differently for each one of them, and then do the job. And the job could be, we send them emails on our forecast. What are the forecasts that we want to exchange for them? It could be, here's a CAPA that we're working on it. There we're exchanging on documents, on the specs of a product. I mean, you name it. There's 43. I'm not going to go through all of them. So definitely, there's that opportunity for us to collaborate. And collaborate in a sense where it makes a delightful experience for the supplier, as well as for the employee. Create a single sign-on for all those jobs to be done. Digitize the ones that are not digitized, or it comes to a doorway to the next system that they need to apply. But that's just scratching the surface, those 43. I think the opportunity is how do we then create intelligence through that portal where you can now push the data depending on the persona that signs on. Hey, you're a supplier X. By the way, we know that you put in 3 calls in the last 3 weeks for this problem that we're having with you. So really now you're really being a little bit proactive with our suppliers and really drive a better outcome at the end.
I went to, when somebody mentioned the figure 43 before, I thought, very exact. And from a supplier experience perspective, as we'll all know, it is end-to-end. And you've probably got, that might be 43 epics, and you've got hundreds of user stories that sit below that.
That's correct.
As well. I think one of the approaches we've seen that's worked quite well, and I don't know, it sounds like you're using it, is embedding agile approaches into creating a backlog, starting somewhere first, and then working through your backlog.
But it's also building an ecosystem that's going to be able to grow, right? It's really creating an intelligent element behind it, not just creating a portal for being able to sign on.
And it's not easy. Another difficult question for you. Because you've got existing processes, sourcing, contracting, supplier performance management, risk management, and you've got supply experience, which kind of goes across all of them, but then goes into your potential PLM system or into your logistics system as well. How do you fix that?
We do. I mean, I think what's at the heart of supplier experience is just connecting the supplier through one front door, going out to those different systems so they don't have to guess which system do I go to submit my invoice or receive my PO or transmit my vendor data. I can go into one front door and it's event-driven, and I have access to all my systems through that one front door. So I don't need to think about which system. I'm prompted to go there.
I got you. Sounds good. You touched upon supplier experience management a little bit in the presentation there, and supplier management has been around for a long time, 20, 30 years, especially if you've been in the director area.
Yeah.
But supply experience management, why now? Why so important?
Well, I think it's been overdue for a long time. I mean, you've written about supplier experience as well, and explained why it's important and why leading companies care about it. So it's overdue, and we've seen plenty of examples recently when product innovation is so rapid. We need to be getting the best ideas from our suppliers, and some research I did at Forrester found that suppliers were most willing to be sharing their best ideas with their preferred customers, and their preferred customers are the ones that treated them fairly, that they trusted, and that pay them on time. And so I think, if you want to get the best ideas from your suppliers, that's one thing. And then more recently, we've seen severe shortages of certain raw materials, and where there's a shortage of raw materials, the suppliers are going to allocate them to their favorite customers. So that's another great example of how, the supplier experience, being a preferred customer, means you get precedence when there's inventory shortages or capacity shortages. And so those are just two examples. And I think we've both seen more and more enterprises embracing this idea of supplier experience, which means the ones who don't become more and more outliers and therefore looked on even less favorably. They stick out more than they used to, because there are so many enterprises who really have moved on.
And in some instances, that's you're almost creating a supplier management platform on its own. You highlighted that as the top layer, which in itself sometimes can plug in other apps, but also importantly data.
Absolutely, yeah, because those ones that you want to regard you favorably, you want to be pulling together all the information about your interactions with them. Are you paying them on time? Are you inviting them to sourcing events and they're not bidding? Or are they bidding on lots of events and not winning? Or are they have quality disputes? Or what? You need to pull that all together holistically, and you're not going to have all that in one database. So,
So another tricky question. What do the suppliers think about it?
I think they're coming to the table. That's the right thing. So one thing that we've done at Johnson & Johnson is create what we call high-performing teams for initiatives that we need to work on. And that is really no more than creating a team from different functions. First, at the center, having a business process owner and a technology process owner, and working hand in hand with engineers and users, and have the supplier at the table as well. And then have a team for the user experience as well as part of the team. So that whole high-performing team is going to be able to drive, but the supplier is sitting with us. And we're targeting, different segments of suppliers first, and then move on. This is a long journey that we're going to try. So I think they're embracing it. It's not all of them that will be able to do it, but I think we're starting to see a very, very good collaboration. And I think, as Duncan mentioned, there's something in it for them. They want that. So they want that attention and innovation, and working with them on that.
And I think it's a fundamental as well, because obviously with many of your big suppliers, they've got their own supply chain, and if they can't embrace the digital journey, then how can they cascade that through their supply chain as well? Again, bringing it to life, with adoption, how do you see the adoption rates of the supplier management platforms, and how do we make sure that it's not just a pilot and then a flat line, it's kind of it's a genuine hockey stick?
I think it's really about removing the friction in the supply chain and being very targeted with your suppliers. Here's content that's relevant to you in the communications, and here's an easy way to communicate with me, not send them on a treasure hunt through the organization of how do I tell you that there's a supply chain disruption, or how do I communicate with you or my buyer with, my buyer changed, who's my new buyer? So giving them the tools to communicate and becoming the customer of choice by making it easy for them.
Right, good. So we talked there a little bit about basically the prioritization of basically supply management and technology, and then looking to see which solutions you want to select, and then how that's relevant in the supplier experience space. Just would like to open it to the floor now to see if there's any questions to the panel.
So when you say supplier experience, what is the value of supplier experience? And you quoted an example. You said in case of shortage, the supplier will prefer to supply to the person who is the favorite customer. Now, supplier itself is an organization. My point of contact may be the salesperson, but he has a CEO over him. And the target for CEO is the profitability. So he will definitely like to go with a customer who is more profitable and more sustainable long term. So how do you define these two paradigms?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So as I understand it, what you're saying is that we talk about supplier experience as if it was just an individual person, which sometimes it is, but generally it isn't. And so how do we measure that when actually we're dealing with a complex organization, and maybe their accounts receivable clerk hates us, but we don't care about that because they don't influence it. Yeah, so I think it's quite a complex question, but it's learn from your colleagues who measure your customer experience if you're dealing with business customers. And they will survey different people in the organization. They will survey the most important decision makers, but they will survey other people who may influence the decision makers to say this company sucks or not. Learn from the knowledge of measuring customer experience, and then look for evidence, look for signs of a fractured relationship, such as deteriorating deliveries or not attending meetings, or maybe you hold a supplier day and they don't show up. Then you've got to inquire why. What's the problem in the relationship? It's not. I'm not trying to say it's easy, but I think if you set that goal as we want to be, there are these suppliers, we want to be their preferred customer, and let's try and measure that. And if we're not, let's try and identify the causes of friction and try and measure those. Then we'll get some. I mean, you've done that at lots of places, I think. Lars.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's linking it to your objectives, your OKRs, using NPS scores. There's a number of different metrics, and then depending on the industry you're in, you can use some sort of standard practices. In the automotive industry, there's a few different organizations that do that across all of the main players. So there's different ways of doing it.
Yeah, I would just, one word of caution, I think a mistake a lot of people make is they identify all these dimensions of a supplier experience, and they say, well, let's measure them all, and let's ask the suppliers about these 25 things. And we know from our own experience, about like when you get that email about how was your check-in experience, and you've got 10 questions about the check-in experience, and you think, no, I'm not going to answer any more of that. So you do have to be very, very targeted and only measure things if you've identified it's a problem. And then you only measure it while there's a problem. When you fix that problem, you stop measuring it and move on to something else.
Marc, how have you been doing that?
I think all of the answers above are good. And it's not one supplier, it's many suppliers, and sometimes it's the type of suppliers, right? And some metrics or some elements of the supplier experience are going to be a little bit vague, but others you can be very targeted. For example, inventory reduction. So by having a better experience at sharing our forecast with our suppliers, cutting down on cycle time, how can we better that? So we need to be, certain elements are going to be very targeted, and others are going to be a little bit more vague. But it's that give and take between the supplier and us that's going to really, really help have that negotiation.
Yeah, hi. I have a question to Marc. In essence, I'm only interested in the supplier experience of the top 1,000, right? And ultimately, the others we need to get rid of anyway, we learned today, right? So I was wondering, and maybe that's a bit to your question, do you have a differentiated supplier experience approach? That's what I'm saying, like the top 100, is that sort of, yes, obviously, the process and the supply experience and the onboarding and the payment on time and the inventory and sharing the forecasts and whatever, right, is all, I would call them nowadays, it's a hygiene factor. But I think the first-class experience is probably something else, right? I was just wondering if you differentiate, and if so, how you do it.
So yes and no. So the first thing is, if you think about J&J, we have over 35,000 suppliers. And definitely there's tier 1, tier 2, and so on and so on. So for every initiative, at the end of the day, we're going to target all of the suppliers that we do business with, starting with a tier 1. And that's how we're going to develop our strategy. Let's say in this example I gave you before, where we're building that portal, we're looking at suppliers that are in tier 1, and here is the medtech, so it's even a smaller sample of suppliers. So definitely there's that element, but we need to have a broader view also from strategic perspective that eventually, if we want to be the one-stop shop for our suppliers, we need to keep in mind what's the broader view. But of course, there is some elements that are going to be a little bit more targeted at the beginning.
Could I just make a comment on supplier segmentation? Because I've done a lot of research into best practices there. I once wrote a report which was tiers are not enough, it was called, because actually having one way of segmenting suppliers is not going to really cut it for you. You tend to say tier based on spend. That isn't necessarily going to direct you correctly when you say who is most important to us going forward. What's a future way of looking at the suppliers? Who do we want to be their favorite customer? It could be a supplier that you don't spend a lot of money with, but actually they're irreplaceable. They've got a unique product that you require in your supply chain, and if they decide to send it somewhere else, you're in trouble. So I would say do a categorization based on where you want to allocate your supplier management resources, and then another one based on who you want to be buying more from in future, and then another one based on the risk angle. I call that the tiers for fears, which is, okay, where is the greatest risk if we have a problem, and maybe we want to be focusing on some of these business critical suppliers that we don't spend a lot of money with, that we really want them to love us.
I mean, it's exactly the right question, though, because fundamentally you need to know your buying channels and you need to know your supply channels. Because we're talking about a portal, everybody comes into the portal, then which way do you go? And that's defined by a little bit by the segmentation, but also by the supply channel, or you're onboarding a supplier, maybe the buying channel. So getting that right drives the volume, drives the capacity, drives the route, drives the risk.
Good afternoon. My name is Rolf. I'm a procurement professional. I would be really interested to know if you do this for your tier 1 suppliers, do you also help them to implement this for their suppliers so that you're going to get an extra step with things that are the same, some subcontractors that are going to have the same portals, that it looks the same? How do you do that? Do you have a team for that as well? Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, and definitely in some cases it could be. We're not at that stage yet. I think we're getting started, but if you take a look at the supply side and we look at, for example, at risk management, some of our products have, I don't know how many components, right? Sometimes it's a small component that is crucial, but that's made by the supplier of a supplier. So definitely if we can bring them an experience to them and be able to create a collaboration at some level, I think that would be a good idea.
So, but it would also, with the supply chain governance, with the CO2, these kinds of things, it would help if that would be integrated.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that if your supplier isn't great to work with for its suppliers, that's a risk to your business, isn't it? Because they're not going to get the innovation there. They're not going to get the preference when there's scarce resources. So I think that's a really good point that you make.
First of all, thanks very much, panel, for some great answers and for great questions. So thanks.